Day 3 on the island. The fire sputters into fading embers, and the ocean whispers like 1,000 secrets he cannot answer. Marcus Thompson's hands, callous, torn, trembling, slip from the bamboo raft he's been weaving. Across from him, Evelyn Carter, once the untouchable CEO of a billion-dollar empire, sits with her back straight in rags of what used to be a designer suit. Her phone lies shattered on volcanic rock. No rescue, no civilization, just hunger and silence. Then her voice cuts the air. Marcus, if we can't go back, if no one finds us, must I marry you to survive? The question hangs like smoke, heavier than hunger. Follow this story to the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I'll know how far this story travels. Marcus froze the thin strip of bamboo slipping from his hand and rolling toward the tide, carried away like a fragment of a future he could no longer control. The firelight painted Evelyn's cheekbones hollow, now shadows rising and falling with every shallow breath. Her words replayed in his mind, jagged and unreal. Must I marry you? It was not the question he had expected. He'd been ready for talk about water food rescue. But marriage. On an island where the world seemed to have ended, she had spoken as if survival could be negotiated like a corporate deal. Marcus's throat tightened. He touched the wedding band still circling his finger, the one he hadn't been able to remove since Lisa's funeral 8 months ago. He saw Lily's face in the flames, gap-toothed smile, messy hair, eyes, filled with too much loss for a 7-year-old. What are you saying, Evelyn? His voice rasped. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time since the crash, the proud steel of Manhattan's boardrooms was gone. I'm saying, if rescue doesn't come, maybe we need something to hold on to. Some framework, some order. Her gaze flicked toward the pathetic raft, tied with vines bobbing like a broken promise in the lagoon. Marcus sat back in the sand. The heat of the fire pressed against his skin, but inside cold crept in. Marriage had been love for him. Messy, hard, breathtaking love. He remembered Lisa laughing on their wedding day, dancing barefoot in the church hall, her dress brushing sawdust from the old wooden floor. Marriage wasn't a structure. It was a choice repeated daily. A choice he thought had ended the day Lisa's heart stopped beating. Marriage isn't about survival, he said softly, eyes on the sparks spiraling toward stars sharp as knives in the dark sky. It's about love, about building something bigger than both of us. Evelyn flinched, then hugged her knees tighter. Her face, streaked with salt and mascara, looked like a war mask eroded by tears. Maybe I don't know how to love, she whispered. I only know how to build things that last companies' power control. I've never been committed. Not really. 6 months was my limit. After that, people wanted feelings futures, and I couldn't give them that. Marcus studied her in the flickering light. She was stripped of her empire, stripped of boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations, stripped of everything except raw humanity. And in that stripped state, she seemed almost fragile. You've survived 3 days without complaint, he said. You figured out how to filter water through coconut husks when I was ready to give up. You split your last food bar with me. That's not control, Evelyn. That's courage. Her lips parted, trembling. Those aren't achievements. That's just not dying. Marcus shook his head. Sometimes not dying is the greatest achievement of all. The waves hissed against the reef. The wind carried jasmine from somewhere in the jungle, mixing with the bitter salt of the sea. Evelyn lowered her forehead to her knees, and her voice broke into the crackle of the fire. Without my company, without stock prices and headlines. Who am I? What am I? The question throbbed in the night. Marcus felt its weight in his chest. He thought of Lily at home, asking when Daddy would come back, clutching the bear Lisa had bought her, drawing family pictures with an angel mother and a lonely father. He thought of himself just a man who moved shipping containers suddenly cast on an island with a woman who had commanded empires. He wanted to answer her, but the truth was, he wasn't sure who he was anymore either. Widower, father, survivor. The tide crept higher, brushing his feet with icy fingers. He stared into the endless dark ocean, the raft swaying with each pull, and wondered if it was mocking them with the promise of freedom it could never deliver. Finally, he lifted his eyes to her. Maybe you're not the CEO anymore. Maybe you're just Evelyn. And maybe that's enough. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed everything, the fire, the ocean, the night. Evelyn raised her head slowly. Her eyes, no longer hard, glistened with something like fear, or maybe hope. She laughed suddenly, brittle and sharp. "Brave Marcus." I cried for 6 hours when I realized my satellite phone was dead. I had a panic attack when I couldn't check Sterling Maritime stock prices. I've been calculating our odds of survival like a quarterly forecast. Her hand shook as she pressed them against her temples. Brave isn't what I am. Desperate, maybe. Lost, definitely. Marcus leaned closer, his voice low. Bravery isn't about never being afraid. It's about showing up anyway. Her lips parted as if she might argue. Instead, she closed her eyes. The fire sank lower, casting her face in bronze and shadow. She breathed in long and shaky, then whispered, "Maybe that's what marriage is for me, Marcus. Not love, just structure, a framework, a way to know what to expect when nothing makes sense." His chest tightened. The words cut him not because they were wrong, but because they carried the loneliness of someone who had never been loved without conditions. He thought of Lisa again, of promises whispered in hospital rooms, of hands held through sickness, of choosing love, even in the face of death. And he realized this woman beside him, this CEO stripped of power, was asking not for a contract, but for something she didn't know how to name. The night deepened, the raft bobbed against its rope. The world shrank to firelight, two broken souls, and a question still hanging in the air. Marcus reached for a driftwood stick and stirred the embers. Sparks spiraled upward, lost in the vast darkness. His voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. Marriage isn't about hierarchy, Evelyn. It's about choosing, every single day. She opened her eyes, searching his face. Her expression was unreadable, caught between defense and surrender. And in that fragile moment, Marcus felt the island itself hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The night bled into dawn, a slow reveal of bruised sky, bleeding pink and orange over the horizon. Marcus sat awake, his back against a palm trunk, listening to the hush of waves and Evelyn's steady breathing. She had fallen asleep, curled near the fire, exhaustion dragging her past fear into fragile rest. In that quiet, Marcus's thoughts wandered where he hated to go home. Home meant Lily's drawings taped on the fridge, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing in rooms that felt too big without Lisa. His late wife's presence still clung to the walls of their modest duplex, a ghost of love that refused to fade. He rubbed his wedding ring absent-mindedly, a habit as instinctive as breathing. Lisa had been gone for 8 months, yet grief lived in him like a second shadow. He closed his eyes and pictured her, the hospital's sterile light. Her hand pale and trembling in his whispering, "Don't close yourself off, Marcus. Lily will need to see you laugh again." He hadn't believed her then. He had promised, but in truth, he thought laughter had died with her. The sound of sand shifting pulled him back. Evelyn stirred, sitting up slowly, her hair tangled and damp with salt air. For a moment, she looked nothing like the CEO who commanded shipping empires. She looked like a woman caught between who she had been and who she was forced to be now. Morning, Marcus said, his voice rough from silence. Evelyn blinked at him, then gave a small, tired smile. "If you can call it that." Her hand brushed at the sand clinging to her ruined suit. "I've had conference rooms more comfortable than this." He chuckled softly despite himself. "I've had deployments in Afghanistan that were worse." Her head turned sharply. "Afghanistan." He nodded, poking at the ashes with a stick. "Engineering Corps. Before Lisa got sick. Before I left the army to raise Lily." He paused, then added, "I've built bridges in deserts, airstrips in places you wouldn't want to see. But nothing prepares you for this." His gesture took in the ocean, the trees, the absence of everything familiar. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then in a voice quieter than he'd ever heard from her, she said, "I've never had to prepare for anything. Everything was given or taken." She drew her knees to her chest. "I was raised in boardrooms. My father called marriage a merger. My mother called it a strategic alliance. Love was never part of the equation." Marcus studied her, the way her eyes glistened in morning light. "And you believed them? What else was there to believe?" She gave a brittle laugh, but it cracked like glass. Love was weakness. Emotion was inefficiency. If I wanted to succeed, I couldn't afford either. She looked out at the horizon where the sun glared off restless water. I've closed billion-dollar deals, increased shareholder value 400%, negotiated trade agreements that changed economies. But I've never been loved, never stayed with anyone long enough to find out if I even could be. Her words trembled, stripped bare of the armor she usually wore. Marcus let silence hold for a moment. He knew silence could be a wound or a gift. Lisa used to say love wasn't grand gestures. It was the small things. Late-night coffee, a hand on your shoulder when you didn't ask, choosing each other when it would have been easier not to. He paused, breath-catching. She taught me love isn't a business deal. It's survival of the soul. Evelyn turned toward him, her lips parting as though to respond, but the words caught. Instead, she whispered, survival of the soul. She repeated it like it was foreign currency she didn't know how to spend. The waves filled the space between them. Marcus felt her gaze linger, then drift away. For the first time, he saw Evelyn not as the CEO splashed across financial magazines, but as a woman stripped of control, struggling with the question of who she was without her empire. She pulled her hands through her hair, grimacing at the tangles. 3 days ago, I was rushing to the Bahamas for a corporate emergency. You were heading to your first vacation since... She trailed off, her eyes flicking toward the ring on his finger. Since Lisa's funeral, Marcus finished, his voice low. Her throat worked as she swallowed. And now here we are. You, a single dad who builds things with his hands. Me, a CEO who's never held anything more than a pen, stuck on an island that doesn't care about either of us. She gave a humorless laugh. What a merger this would be. Marcus shook his head. Don't call it that. His voice held more bite than he intended. Marriage isn't a merger. Love isn't a contract. He looked at her eyes steady. It's the opposite of what you've been taught. It's vulnerability. And yeah, it's terrifying. The words seemed to settle over her like heavy cloth. She lowered her eyes, her fingers curling into the sand. Maybe I don't know how to survive that kind of terror. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Maybe that's the point. For a moment their eyes locked, and something flickered there, fragile like a spark in the wind, a possibility neither dared name. The morning sun rose higher, burning away the chill. Marcus stood brushing sand from his clothes. Come on, we need more firewood, and coconuts if we're lucky. Evelyn hesitated, then rose too barefoot on sharp coral and broken shells. She winced, but didn't complain. As they walked toward the tree line, Marcus glanced at her. For all her talk of weakness, she hadn't given up, and that he realized was worth more than any empire. The jungle swallowed them in green shadows, the air thick with heat and the cry of unseen birds. And as Marcus hacked at fallen branches with a jagged rock, he wondered not for the first time if survival was teaching them something civilization never had, something about who they were and who they might become. The jungle pressed in like a living thing, thick with vines and shadows that whispered secrets Marcus didn't want to hear. Every step crunched on damp soil and brittle leaves, the humidity clinging to his skin, the salt of the ocean still crusting his hair. Beside him, Evelyn stumbled more than once. Her bare feet bore fresh cuts, blood darkening against pale skin, but she said nothing. Not a sound. Marcus noticed, and that silence unsettled him. Most people in her position would have cursed, cried, or collapsed, but she walked on, jaw tight, eyes fixed ahead. For someone who had once commanded empires with words, she had become terrifyingly quiet. Finally, he stopped holding out a hand. We should rest. I'm fine, she snapped too quickly. Then softer. We need firewood, right? Then let's get firewood. Marcus studied her, the rise and fall of her shoulders, the way her hands trembled despite her iron posture. He knew that posture. He had worn it too after Lisa died, the mask of strength that cracked only when no one was looking. He crouched, pulling a fallen branch from the undergrowth. The bark was rough, flaking in his hands, but it would burn. You don't have to prove anything here, Evelyn. Her laugh was sharp, brittle. Everything I've ever done was about proving something. Proving I could outwork the men who doubted me. Proving I could run an empire without anyone's help. Proving weakness wasn't in my DNA. She sank to the ground, hugging her knees again, forehead pressed against them. And now, Here I am, barefoot bleeding, unable to even keep my balance on sand. Who am I without my company, without all of it? Marcus dropped the branch with a dull thud. For a moment he stared at her, torn between frustration and compassion. Maybe you're just Evelyn Carter, and maybe that's enough. Her head lifted slowly, her eyes glinting with something unguarded. Enough for what? For surviving. For being human. For being seen. The last word lingered, and Marcus realized how true it was. Evelyn had been seen her whole life, but only as a CEO, as a headline, as a woman wielding power in a man's world. But who had seen her, the woman behind the armor? She blinked, lips parting as if the thought itself was too fragile to hold. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant crash of waves. Marcus looked away, first scanning the jungle for coconuts. His throat felt dry, his chest tight, as though he'd said too much. They gathered wood together, Evelyn wincing with every step, yet refusing his hand. By the time they returned to the beach, their arms ached with bundles of branches. They dropped them beside the fire pit, sweat dripping down their faces. Evelyn collapsed into the sand, staring out at the horizon where the ocean stretched endlessly. "It's funny," she said after a long pause. "I can negotiate with presidents and billionaires, but I can't make this island obey me. No matter how I plan, no matter how I strategize, the ocean doesn't care. The sun doesn't care." Her voice wavered. "I don't matter here." Marcus sat beside her, lighting a spark with the driftwood. "You matter to me, right now, on this beach." The fire caught flames, licking upward, warmth spreading. Evelyn's eyes reflected the flicker, wide and uncertain. Why Marcus hesitated, the question lodging in his chest like a thorn. Why did she matter? Why, after only 3 days, did he feel a pull, stronger than hunger, stronger than fear? He thought of Lily, of how she would look at him if she knew he had given up on someone. He thought of Lisa and how she had always believed love wasn't about logic, but about showing up. "Because you're here," he said finally. "Because you're trying. Because you haven't given up." Evelyn's breath hitched. Her eyes shimmered, catching light like broken glass. She whispered almost too softly to hear, "I don't know how to be loved, Marcus." The confession cracked something inside him. He saw not the CEO, not the woman in torn silk, but a child raised on mergers and strategies who had never been held without expectation. He wanted to reach for her, to pull her into the kind of embrace that said, "You're enough." But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he whispered back, "Then maybe we start with learning." Her gaze lingered on him, heavy, searching. For once, she didn't argue. The fire snapped, sending sparks into the night. Time stretched, the silence turning almost tender. Evelyn shifted closer to the flames, her body relaxing by degrees. Marcus watched her, watched the way her defenses cracked open like seashells under pressure. At last she exhaled, long and shaky. "Marriage loves survival. It all feels the same right now, like things I can't control. And I hate not being in control." Marcus poked at the fire, his face shadowed. "Control won't keep you warm. Control won't bring you hope. Sometimes, the bravest thing is letting go." The words hung between them, fragile as glass, and for the first time Evelyn didn't look away. They sat like that until the moon rose high, the raft rocking in the lagoon, mocking them with both promise and impossibility. The night wrapped around them, not as enemies now, but as companions, learning the shape of each other's silence. The moonlight silvered the waves, painting the shoreline in shifting ribbons of light. Marcus sat with his elbows on his knees, watching the tide crawl in and out, as if it too was undecided about staying or leaving. Beside him, Evelyn's breathing was steady, but her posture was wound tight, every muscle in her body speaking of control she could not afford to lose. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost as if she feared the night might carry her words too far. "My parents," she said, eyes fixed on the black horizon, never touched each other unless cameras were present. They smiled at Gala's held hands when the press asked, but behind closed doors, they were strangers. Strangers with rings, with contracts, with money to bind them. Marcus turned his head slightly. "That's what you grew up thinking marriage was?" Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "A vertical integration, as my father called it. A strategic alliance, according to my mother. The only time they agreed on anything. She hugged her arms around herself. Feelings were considered liabilities. Love was a distraction. Vulnerability. Suicide. Marcus poked the fire with a stick, sparks spiraling into the night. And you believed them? Of course I did. She looked at him now, her eyes gleaming wet in the firelight. I had no other model. And so I treated relationships like quarterly reports. 6 months, maybe a year, then move on before things got complicated. Before they wanted something I couldn't give. Her voice cracked. Before they asked me to be real. Marcus inhaled, slow and deliberate, holding her gaze. And now you're asking me about marriage as if it's a shield, as if it's control. Her lips trembled. She looked away toward the waves. Isn't that what marriage is supposed to do? Define roles, establish order. Make sure nothing falls apart. No, Marcus said firmer. Now his tone carrying the weight of his own memories. Marriage is about building something bigger than yourself. About choosing someone every single day, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it, especially then. He thought of Lisa. Their vows whispered in a small church while Lily unborn kicked softly in her womb. He thought of hospital nights filled with machines and silence, when love meant holding her hand and pretending he wasn't breaking. Love wasn't a contract. It was the choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. Evelyn's hands trembled in her lap. I don't know if I'm capable of that. I don't know how to be anything other than useful. The firelight flickered, drawing harsh lines across her face, revealing the exhaustion, the rawness beneath the armor. Marcus saw her, then truly saw her, not as a CEO, not as a stranger thrown into survival, but as a woman aching to be more than the sum of her achievements. You've already been more than useful, he said quietly. You've been human. That's all anyone can ask. Her throat worked as she swallowed, eyes darting back to him. Human, she repeated as if testing the word on her tongue. I've never been allowed to just be that. For a moment they sat in silence, listening to the ocean's eternal breath. The bamboo raft creaked against its anchor, rocking like a toy in the lagoon. It seemed to echo Evelyn's confession, something fragile, something barely held together, yet refusing to sink. Finally she whispered, if civilization doesn't exist anymore, if this is it, then maybe I could try. But I don't know how to start. Marcus leaned forward, his voice soft but steady. Start by letting yourself be seen. Not as CEO Evelyn Carter, just as Evelyn. Her eyes lingered on him, wide and uncertain, before finally dropping. A single tear slid down her cheek, and she didn't bother to hide it. The tide hissed, and the fire popped. In the quiet that followed, Marcus felt the weight of two lives reshaping, colliding in ways neither had asked for, yet both somehow needed. When Evelyn finally spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. What if I can't be loved, Marcus? What if no matter what I try, it's not enough? Marcus's chest tightened. He reached out almost against his own will, his fingers brushing the back of her hand. Her skin was cold, trembling, but she didn't pull away. Then we'll figure it out, he said. One day at a time. One moment at a time. Her breath caught. She stared at their joined hands as if she had never seen such a thing before, as if the simple act of touch was more foreign than all the countries she'd ever negotiated with. And in that fragile silence, Marcus realized something startling. He wasn't just comforting her. He was opening a door he thought he had sealed forever, back when he buried Lisa. The fire sank lower, glowing embers painting the sand in amber hues. The waves whispered against shore, the stars above burning sharp and endless. Evelyn leaned just barely into the warmth of his touch, and Marcus knew with a clarity that frightened him that this island was not just testing their survival, it was testing their hearts. The next morning arrived in shards of light spilling through palm leaves and striking the sand with a brilliance that felt almost cruel. Marcus stirred from uneasy sleep, his back aching from the unforgiving ground. He blinked against the glare, sitting upright slowly, and saw Evelyn standing at the water's edge. She wasn't wearing her mask today. The morning breeze lifted her tangled hair strands, whipping against her face. Her torn suit jacket hung loose on her frame, exposing bruised legs and scraped arms. Her bare feet sank into wet sand, each incoming wave reaching to claim her before retreating again. She looked smaller, somehow. Less CEO, more woman adrift. Marcus rose, brushing sand from his arms. He walked toward her, careful not to startle her, his footsteps muffled by the roar of the surf. "You've been up a while." Her voice came soft, distant. "I couldn't sleep." "Nightmares?" he asked. "Memories." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Galas, conferences, men in suits who listened only because I held the power. Funny how useless all of that is now." She let out a dry laugh. "Turns out I can negotiate shipping lanes across continents, but I can't negotiate with hunger." Marcus stood beside her, looking out at the horizon where sea and sky blurred into a single endless expanse. Hunger doesn't listen to anyone. Evelyn tilted her head, studying him with a sharpness that lingered even now. "You've lost more than I have, haven't you?" The question hit him like a stone. He inhaled sharply, eyes narrowing at the waves. "I lost Lisa." The name alone carried weight. 8 months ago. Cancer. I've been trying to keep breathing for Lily's sake." Silence stretched. The ocean hissed and seagulls wheeled overhead. Evelyn's lips parted, then closed again as though words failed her. At last she said quietly, "And now you're here. With me. With someone who doesn't know how to love you back." Marcus turned toward her, the sun catching the lines etched by grief on his face. Maybe it's not about knowing. Maybe it's about trying. For the first time, she didn't look away. Her eyes held his unflinching, even as tears gathered. "Why haven't you given up, Marcus?" "Most people would have by now." "On the raft. On me." He thought of Lily, her small arms wrapping around his neck every night, her drawings of family that always included an angel mother. "Because my daughter still needs me," he said. "Because Lisa wanted me to live, not just survive, and maybe because I see something in you." Her breath caught. "What could you possibly see in me?" He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "The woman who figured out how to filter salt water when I was ready to give up. The woman who gave me her last energy bar. The woman who hasn't complained once despite everything." Evelyn's brow furrowed. "Those aren't achievements. Those are scraps." "Scraps can keep people alive," Marcus said firmly. "Scraps can become something bigger when shared." The words seemed to unravel something inside her. She swayed slightly, and Marcus steadied her without thinking, his hand warm on her arm. For a moment she leaned into him as though the simple act of being held was foreign but necessary. She whispered, "I don't know how to be this person, Marcus. I don't know how to exist without titles, without control." "Then stop trying to be that person," he murmured. "Just be Evelyn." Her lips quivered, the name sounding almost strange in her ears. Evelyn. Not Carter, not CEO, just a woman standing barefoot in the sand. They stood together, the ocean spraying mist across their faces, until she finally pulled back, wiping at her eyes quickly. "We should gather food," she said, the CEO edge slipping back in as armor. Marcus nodded. "Let's check the tide pools. Maybe we'll get lucky with crabs." The day became a rhythm of survival. They searched tide pools, flipping rocks slick with seaweed. Evelyn shrieked once when a crab scuttled toward her, and Marcus laughed an unguarded, genuine laugh he hadn't felt in months. The sound startled them both, but it lingered, softening the edges of the day. By afternoon, they sat by the fire, roasting their meager catch. Evelyn chewed, slowly grimacing. Gourmet dining courtesy of the island. Marcus grinned. "Better than MRE's." She raised a brow. "MRE's meals ready to eat," he explained. "Military rations, dry as cardboard, but they'll keep you alive." Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "Guess I'll take this over cardboard." The moment stretched lighter than the days before. For the first time, they laughed together. Not forced, not bitter, but real. And Marcus realized something important. Beneath her armor, Evelyn wasn't incapable of joy. She had just forgotten how to find it. As the fire crackled and dusk fell, Evelyn leaned back in the sand, gazing at the stars. "Do you think anyone's looking for us?" Marcus followed her gaze. "The stars were sharp tonight, endless." "I hope so. But until then, we have each other." The words slipped out before he could stop them. He tensed, unsure how she'd respond. But Evelyn didn't argue. She didn't retreat into sarcasm or business language. She just whispered, each other, as if testing the weight of the words uncertain but willing. And Marcus, listening to the ocean's eternal rhythm, let the fragile hope of that phrase settle in his heart. The fire had burned down to embers by the time Marcus stretched out on the sand, exhaustion tugging at his bones. The night was warm, the stars so sharp they seemed close enough to pluck from the sky. He glanced toward Evelyn, who lay a few feet away, her face illuminated faintly by the fading glow. Her breathing was shallow, restless. He turned onto his side, propping himself on an elbow. "You're not sleeping," he murmured. Her eyes opened immediately, as if she'd been waiting for him to notice. "Neither are you." He gave a small, rueful smile. "Guess we're both stubborn." She sat up slowly, brushing sand from her arms. For a moment she stared at the ocean, then back at him. "Do you ever laugh anymore, Marcus?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "You laugh sometimes. I've heard it, like when the crab scared me earlier." She hesitated, biting her lip. "But it's rare. It sounds like something you don't let yourself do often." Marcus looked away, jaw tightening. "Lisa used to say my laugh was the thing she fell in love with first. After she died, it felt wrong to let it out again, like laughing was betraying her memory." The night went quiet except for the whisper of the surf. Evelyn's expression softened, all the sharpness gone. Maybe laughing is exactly what she would have wanted. Maybe it's not betrayal, it's survival. He swallowed hard, her words cutting deeper than he expected. For a moment he imagined Lisa's smile, imagined Lily begging him to laugh again the way children instinctively crave light in their parents. When he finally looked back at Evelyn, she was smiling faintly herself. "There, you're doing it again." He blinked. Doing what? Laughing, or almost laughing. Her voice trembled just enough to reveal the truth that mattered to her more than she wanted to admit. Marcus shook his head, but the tension eased from his chest. He found himself chuckling softly, the sound carried away by the waves. Evelyn's lips curved into something genuine, her teeth flashing briefly in the dim firelight. For once it wasn't the polished smile of a CEO. It was awkward, unpracticed, but real. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Marcus said. Her laugh was low, almost self-conscious. "It feels human." He studied her in that moment, stripped of her armor, laughing like she hadn't in years. And he realized something that startled him. Evelyn Carter wasn't just capable of surviving here. She was capable of being someone new, someone softer, someone braver. The fire hissed as a breeze passed through. Evelyn pulled her knees to her chest, resting her chin there. "When I was a child, I thought stars were useless. Pretty, but useless. My father told me they were a distraction, things dreamers stared at instead of focusing on reality. I trained myself to ignore them." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And now?" She looked up at the vast glittering sky. For a moment she was silent. Then she whispered, "Now they're the only thing that reminds me the world is bigger than me." Her words drifted into the night, settling between them like fragile truths. Marcus leaned back on the sand, letting the constellations fill his vision. "Lisa and I used to lie outside on the hood of my old truck counting stars. She said they were promises written where we couldn't reach them, but meant to guide us anyway." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I thought she was crazy, but now I'm not so sure." Evelyn turned toward him, her face half lit by starlight. "She sounds remarkable." She was. Marcus's chest tightened, but instead of pain, there was warmth this time. Memory not as wound, but as reminder. The silence that followed was gentle. For once, Evelyn didn't rush to fill it. She sat there gazing at the stars, her shoulders easing as though she had been carrying a weight she didn't realize could be set down. Finally, she whispered, maybe this is what I needed. Not the crash, not the hunger, not the fear, but the stripping away. To see who I really am underneath." Marcus turned his head, watching her closely. "And who is that?" Her lips parted, trembling with uncertainty. "I don't know yet." The admission was raw, unguarded, and in it Marcus saw more courage than in all her talk of control. He shifted closer, not touching just near enough for her to feel his presence. "Then maybe we'll figure it out together." Her eyes shimmered, catching the starlight, and for the first time she didn't argue. She simply nodded. The night deepened, the embers fading to ash. But the silence between them was no longer heavy with fear. It was something else now, something alive. Evelyn stretched out on the sand again, this time closer to him, her arm brushing his lightly. She didn't pull away. And Marcus, staring at the stars that Lisa once called promises, let himself believe that maybe this island had given him one too. The morning came with a heavy humidity, the kind that wrapped itself around skin like a damp blanket. Marcus stirred awake to find Evelyn already crouched by the remnants of the fire, poking at ashes with a stick. Her hair clung to her temples, her cheeks streaked with salt and dirt. Yet when she looked up at him, there was a faint curve to her lips, something between a smirk and a question. "You snore," she said. Marcus blinked, half asleep still. "Do not." Her eyebrow arched. "Oh, you do." Like an engine trying to restart. Loud enough I considered moving down the beach. He chuckled, rubbing at his eyes. "Guess it's the first time anyone's complained in a while." "Maybe that's a good thing," Evelyn said, tossing the stick aside. "Means you were really sleeping. That's rare for people who carry too much." Her words caught him off guard. He thought of Lisa, of nights he'd spent staring at ceilings, listening for a breath that never came. He thought of Lily asleep beside her grandmother while he lay awake with grief pressing his chest. He hadn't slept deeply in months, maybe years. He glanced at Evelyn again. "What about you? Did you sleep?" Her shoulders lifted and fell. Barely. Dreams kept coming, not of the crash, of boardrooms, phones buzzing, emails, all the things I thought made me powerful. Only in the dream no one listened, no one cared. She stared at the sand, her voice dropping. And when I woke up here, I realized maybe that's not far from the truth. Marcus sat up, leaning forward. "You built an empire. People had to care. Did they?" She let out a humorless laugh. "They cared about the power, the money, the connections. Not me, not Evelyn, just the CEO." She looked at him, eyes burning. "That's why I asked you that question. About marriage. It wasn't about love. It was about creating something that meant I wasn't disposable." The honesty in her voice stunned him. He let it hang in the air before he answered. "Evelyn, you're not disposable. Not here, not anywhere. You've been fighting since the moment we landed. That's not someone who disappears." Her lips trembled and she looked away quickly as though afraid to be seen. The day stretched on, filled with the rhythm of survival. Marcus climbed palms to knock down coconuts, the rough bark tearing his hands. Evelyn waded into tide pools, her hair plastered to her face as she searched for clams. They worked without speaking much, yet every glance, every unspoken exchange carried weight. At midday, they sat by the fire, cracking coconuts with jagged stones. Evelyn wiped sweat from her brow, laughing suddenly when the shell split and sprayed her. The sound startled Marcus. It was sharp, real, unpolished. Not the polite chuckle of corporate dinners. He grinned. "There it is again." "What?" she asked, still catching her breath. "Your real laugh. Haven't heard that before." She paused, holding the broken coconut half in her hands. For a moment her eyes softened and her smile faltered. "I don't remember the last time I laughed like that." "Maybe that's what this place is giving you," Marcus said. "A chance to remember." Her gaze lingered on him, something unspoken shimmering there. Then she looked down, sipping coconut water slowly as though trying to hide her own thoughts. The afternoon sun scorched them as they worked on the raft again, binding bamboo with strips of vine. It was clumsy, fragile. Each knot felt like hope tied to desperation. Evelyn's hands bled from the effort, blisters breaking open, but she never once asked to stop. When the raft finally floated in the shallow water, bobbing with uncertain promise, Evelyn collapsed beside it, her breath ragged. She stared at the horizon with wild, shining eyes. "Do you think it'll carry us?" Marcus studied it, awkward angles, uneven lashings. "Maybe. Maybe not." Her laugh was bitter this time. "Story of my life." But then her voice broke into something raw. "Marcus, what if it doesn't? What if we die here? What if this—" She gestured to the sand, the fire, the endless sea is all that's left for us. Marcus crouched beside her, his hand brushing her shoulder without thought. "Then we keep choosing, every day, not just survival, something more." She turned her head toward him, her face pale, streaked with sun and salt. Something more. She repeated the words as if she wanted to believe them but didn't know how. The wind picked up rattling palm leaves overhead. The raft creaked in the water, fragile as the moment between them. Marcus held her gaze steady, unflinching. Evelyn, marriage isn't control. It's choosing love even when everything else feels impossible. Her lips parted, trembling. For a heartbeat, she looked ready to argue. Then instead she whispered, "And what if I fail at that?" "Then you try again tomorrow," Marcus said simply. Silence stretched. The sun bled into horizon fire, painting the sky in violent orange. Evelyn's eyes shone, reflecting the flames, and in that silence, for the first time, she leaned into him, not out of weakness, not out of control, but because something in her had shifted. Because maybe, just maybe, she wanted to believe. The storm announced itself with a whisper that grew into a roar. Clouds gathered over the horizon, black and swelling, the kind that made the ocean heave like a restless giant. By late afternoon, the light was gone, swallowed by a darkness so heavy it felt like dusk had arrived too soon. Marcus tightened the lashings on the raft, his hands raw and shaking. "We need to secure everything: shelter, food, firewood." Evelyn stood nearby, her eyes wide as the wind tore at her tangled hair. "How bad will it be?" Marcus glanced at the sky, the way the trees bent, the salt stinging his face. Bad enough. Thunder cracked like the sky itself was splitting. Evelyn flinched, hugging her arms to her chest. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked not like a CEO stripped of her empire, but like a child stripped of safety. Marcus grabbed her arm, steadying her. "Come on, we've got to move." Together they scrambled to the lean-to they had built against the rocks. The walls of palm fronds and driftwood shook as the first sheets of rain pounded down. Inside, Evelyn crouched, her knees pulled tight, her whole body trembling as the wind howled like a wild animal. Marcus knelt beside her, shielding her from the spray with his back. The storm hit in full force, rain-lashing waves, crashing branches, tearing loose, and slamming against stone. Every gust rattled their fragile shelter, until it seemed certain the whole thing would collapse. Evelyn clutched his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Marcus?" Her voice cracked, nearly drowned by the storm. "What if it breaks?" What if he turned his face toward her, forcing her eyes to meet his? "Then we hold on. To each other. We'll make it through." For a heartbeat, her panic quieted, just enough for him to see something raw flicker across her face: trust. She buried her head against his shoulder as another crack of thunder shook the earth. Time blurred into chaos. The shelter gave way in places, forcing Marcus to hold the frame with his own weight. Water streamed over them, soaking them to the bone. Yet through it all, he felt her clinging tighter. Not as CEO, not as strategist, but as a woman who, for the first time, wasn't in control and didn't try to be. Hours later, when the worst finally passed, the beach was unrecognizable. The fire was gone. The raft, half torn apart, bobbed helplessly in the lagoon, tethered only by a vine. Palm fronds littered the sand like wreckage. Marcus collapsed against the rock, gasping for air, his muscles burning from holding the shelter together. Evelyn slid down beside him, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes red from salt and tears. For a long while, neither spoke. The only sound was the ocean's ragged breath as waves continued to slam the shore. Then Evelyn whispered, "You saved me." Marcus shook his head, his voice hoarse. "No, we saved each other." She turned to him, her face streaked with rain and grit, and for once she didn't hide the tears sliding down her cheeks. "Do you understand what that means to me? My whole life I've never let anyone carry me, never let anyone see me break, and tonight you did both." Marcus met her gaze, his chest tightening. "And you didn't shatter. You're still here." Her lips trembled, the weight of his words pressing against the fragile wall she had built for decades. Then in a voice raw and trembling, she confessed, "Marcus, maybe I asked you about marriage because I was too afraid to ask about love." The words hung between them heavier than thunder. Marcus's breath caught. He reached up, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. His hand lingered, cradling her cheek. "Marriage isn't about control, Evelyn. It's about love. Love that chooses you when everything else falls apart." Her eyes closed, a tear slipping free. "And what if I don't know how to be loved?" "Then let me show you," he whispered. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full thick with the sound of rain dripping from leaves, the ocean's groan, the unsteady rhythm of their breaths. And in that silence, Evelyn leaned forward, her forehead pressing to his. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was surrender, the first surrender of her life. The storm outside faded into the distance, but inside something entirely new had begun. The storm left the island scarred. Palm leaves lay scattered across the sand like discarded feathers. The raft they had worked on for days was half shattered, its bamboo lashed weakly creaking as it drifted in the shallow lagoon. The air still smelled of salt and ozone, heavy and raw. Marcus woke with his back against a rock, every muscle aching from the night's battle. His clothes clung damp to his skin. Beside him, Evelyn stirred, her face pale and streaked with dried tears. For a moment neither moved. They simply breathed, listening to the ocean's restless growl. When Marcus finally pushed himself upright, he noticed her watching him. Her eyes were softer, somehow stripped of the sharp calculation he had come to expect. "We survived," she said hoarsely. He nodded. "We did." Her gaze drifted to the ruined raft. Barely. Marcus followed her eyes. The sight struck him harder than he expected. That raft had been their hope, fragile though it was. Now it bobbed in pieces, as broken as the illusion of control Evelyn had clung to. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "I thought, if I held on hard enough, I could force the storm to obey me. But it didn't care." Marcus crouched beside her, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "Storms never care. All we can do is hold on." And we did. Her lips parted, trembling. "I didn't hold on to the shelter, Marcus. I held on to you." The confession pierced him. He thought of Lisa, how she had held his hand through chemo, how her grip had been stronger than her voice in those final days. Love had always been to him that silent act of holding on when nothing else remained. He reached out now, brushing his fingers lightly against Evelyn's wrist. "And I held on to you." Her breath caught her shoulders shaking. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you?" Marcus searched her face, the dirt, the salt, the bruises, and saw not weakness, but a kind of raw strength she couldn't yet see in herself. "Because you matter," he said. "Because somewhere in all of this I stopped seeing the CEO and started seeing you." Her eyes shimmered. She turned away quickly, but her voice carried into the sea air. "No one has ever seen me like that. Not my parents. Not the men I dated. Not even myself." She pressed her hands to her temples as if the thought itself was unbearable. "I don't know how to handle it." Marcus let silence fall, giving her space. He knew too well the weight of being seen. After Lisa's death, being seen meant people's pity, their awkward questions, their empty condolences. Sometimes it felt easier to disappear into work, into silence, than to be visible in grief. Finally, Evelyn lifted her face, wet hair clinging to her cheeks. "You said marriage is about love, not control. But love..." Her voice broke. "Love terrifies me more than this storm did." Marcus leaned closer, his voice gentle but sure. "That's because love is the only thing you can't control. You can't predict it. You can't measure it. You can only choose it." She stared at him, her lips parting as though to respond, but no words came. The day dragged on. They worked in silence to salvage what they could of the raft. Marcus cut new vines. Evelyn gathered bamboo fragments. Her hands bled from the effort, but she refused to stop. Each time Marcus offered to take over, she shook her head. "I need to do this," she said firmly. By evening, they sat beside the fire again, the sea still restless but calmer now. Evelyn's arms trembled from exhaustion. She watched the raft bob in the water, fragile but still afloat. "Marcus," she whispered. He looked up, the firelight catching the weary lines on his face. Her voice was steady, though soft. "I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know how to be loved. But when the storm hit, when everything broke, the only thing I wanted was you." Marcus's chest tightened. He felt the echo of Lisa's voice in the memory of their vows, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. He had believed those words ended with her grave, but now staring at Evelyn, he wondered if love could be reborn even in the ashes of grief. He reached across the fire, his hand open. She hesitated only a moment before placing hers in it. Her palm was rough now, cut and bruised, caught between the softness of who she once was and the resilience of who she was becoming. He squeezed gently. Then, let's not talk about marriage tonight. Let's talk about us. About two people who are still here, still breathing, still choosing. Her eyes filled, and this time she didn't look away. She let the tears fall freely, the firelight reflecting in every drop. The night wrapped around them, and though the storm had left wreckage, something stronger remained, a fragile bond pulsing like the embers between them. And as Evelyn whispered, "Maybe choosing is enough," Marcus felt something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in 8 long months. Hope. The island had begun to change them, not in sudden dramatic ways, but in small details that crept in without warning. Evelyn no longer flinched when her feet met sharp coral. Marcus no longer checked the horizon every 5 minutes for rescue that never came. They were adapting together, building a rhythm that looked strangely like life. 3 weeks passed since the crash. Marcus carved fishing spears from driftwood, while Evelyn wove palm fronds into mats for sleeping. They built new shelters, stronger this time, anchored against storms. When she worked, her hands bled, but she never complained. He caught her humming once, low and tuneless, as she stacked coconuts. It startled him, the sound of a woman rediscovering something simple inside herself. That evening, they sat by the fire with fish roasting on a spit. Smoke curled into the sky, stars blooming overhead. Evelyn leaned back on her elbows, her hair catching faint firelight. Her face thinner now, but softer too. "I never thought I'd survive like this," she admitted. "No meetings, no reports, no schedule. Just breathing." Marcus smiled faintly. "And you're still here." She turned her head toward him, a teasing glint flashing. "So are you." The banter was light, but beneath it pulsed something heavier. Marcus felt it every time their hands brushed, every time her laughter rang out unexpectedly. He had sworn his heart belonged only to Lisa, that love had been buried with her. But watching Evelyn laugh now, watching her fight for survival with grit she didn't know she had, he wondered if maybe hearts weren't graves at all. Maybe they were gardens. Later, as the fire dwindled, Evelyn spoke again, her voice quiet. "Marcus, why do you keep looking at me like that?" He froze. "Like what? Like I'm someone worth believing in." He set the stick down, leaning toward her. "Because you are." Her breath caught. For a moment, silence held them, broken only by waves licking the sand. Then she whispered, "I don't know how to carry that. No one's ever looked at me that way before." Marcus felt the weight of her words. He wanted to tell her that Lisa had once taught him love wasn't about perfection, but presence about being seen in the ordinary. But he swallowed it. Instead, he said simply, "Then let me keep looking until you believe it yourself." Her eyes glistened, and she didn't look away this time. Days blurred into each other. Survival became routine. They worked together, ate together, laughed together. There were still arguments when Evelyn insisted on tying knots her way, when Marcus scolded her for cutting her hands again. But even arguments carried a strange intimacy. One night, as they lay side by side under stars, Evelyn whispered into the dark Marcus, "What if this is it? What if we're never rescued?" He turned his head, their shoulders nearly touching. "Then we keep building, not just shelters or rafts, a life. Something worth waking up for." She swallowed, her voice trembling. "A life with you." His throat tightened, but his answer came steady. "Yes, if you'll have me." The silence stretched thick with fear and hope. Then she whispered, "I don't know how to be loved, but maybe I can learn how to love you." Marcus closed his eyes, his heart hammering. The confession wasn't grand, wasn't polished, but it was real. And for the first time since Lisa's funeral, he felt his chest expand with something more than grief. Weeks later, Evelyn had scars on her hands, sunburn on her skin, and a laugh that sounded freer with each passing day. Marcus caught her once sitting by the lagoon tracing shapes in the sand. When he asked what she was doing, she said quietly, "Trying to remember who I was before CEO Carter. And who I might be now." He crouched beside her, brushing the hair from her eyes. "Whoever she is, I already like her." Her smile trembled, but she didn't argue. Instead, she leaned against his shoulder. The raft bobbed nearby, stronger now, rebuilt piece by piece. But Marcus realized something as Evelyn's head rested on him. Whether it carried them away or broke again, it no longer mattered. Because on this island, something had already been built, something stronger than bamboo or rope, a life, a bond, a fragile growing love. The days slid into each other, marked not by calendars or clocks, but by the rhythm of tides and the crackle of nightly fires. Marcus found himself watching Evelyn more often than he admitted. Not because she was the CEO he once knew only from news headlines, but because she was no longer that woman at all. She had become something different, barefoot, sunburned, scarred, yet somehow freer than he'd ever seen her. One evening, as they roasted fish, Evelyn stared into the flames, her voice low. "Marcus, if we ever get off this island, what happens then?" He paused, his hand tightening around the stick in his grip. "What do you mean?" She turned toward him, her eyes reflecting firelight. "What if this is just island love? What if the moment we step back into the real world, everything we've built here disappears?" The question cut deeper than the jagged coral he had stepped on earlier. He thought of Lisa again, how love with her had been built on the ordinary grocery runs, bedtime stories, holding hands on tired evenings. And he thought of Evelyn, who had learned to weave mats from palm fronds, who laughed when smoke stung her eyes, who had started humming songs she didn't remember she knew. "This isn't just survival," Marcus said firmly. "And it isn't just the island. It's us. If we go back then, we choose each other there too, one day at a time." Her lips parted, trembling, but she didn't speak. Instead, her hand drifted toward his, hesitant. He didn't hesitate. He wrapped his fingers around hers, steady and warm. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the night. Evelyn's shoulders softened, her defenses lowering by degrees. "You make it sound simple," she whispered. "It is simple," Marcus replied. "It's just not easy." Her laugh was shaky, uncertain. "Simple, not easy. I can live with that." They sat in silence, hands entwined, listening to the sea breathe against the shore. Weeks passed. Together they rebuilt the raft stronger than before, testing it each morning in the shallows. Evelyn grew steadier, her feet tougher, her hands calloused. She no longer looked like a woman stranded, she looked like someone becoming new, but still at night fear crept in. One evening, as they lay beneath stars, Evelyn whispered, "Marcus, what if rescue never comes?" He rolled onto his side, meeting her gaze. "Then we keep building a life, right here." Her breath shivered. "A life with you." He nodded. "Yes, with me." Her eyes filled, shimmering. She pressed her forehead to his whispering words. She barely believed herself. "I don't know how to be loved, but I want to learn how to love you." The confession was like a tide breaking through. Marcus's chest tightened, his heart pulling against scars he thought would never heal. Lisa's voice echoed in his memory. "Don't close yourself off. Lily will need to see you laugh again." He realized then this was what she had meant. Love didn't die with her. Love waited stubborn and quiet until he was ready to choose again. They kissed for the first time that night, tentative and trembling, tasting of salt and smoke. It wasn't passion born of desperation. It was something deeper, a beginning. When dawn came, they woke tangled in each other's arms. Evelyn's head rested against his chest, and Marcus felt a peace he hadn't known in years. But peace carried weight and questions. Later, as they walked the beach gathering driftwood, Evelyn spoke softly. "Marcus, if we're rescued, you'll go back to your daughter, and I'll go back to my company. What if those lives don't fit together?" Marcus stopped, turning to her. "Then we make new lives. Ones that do fit. We don't have to be who we were before." Her eyes searched his, wide and vulnerable. "You really believe that?" "Yes," he said simply. "Because I've already started." Her lips trembled, but she smiled through it. For the first time, she didn't hide her hope. That night the raft rocked in the lagoon, tethered like a promise, waiting for the right moment. Marcus lay awake beside Evelyn, his arm around her. And he knew with a clarity as sharp as the stars above that no matter what happened, rescue or no rescue, the island had already changed everything. They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't CEO and single dad. They were partners. And partners always found a way. They saw it first as a shimmer, then a speck, then a dragonfly of metal scratching the sky with its blades. Marcus stood so fast the world tilted, his vision swimming from hunger and the sudden surge of hope. Evelyn's hand found his forearm, fingers digging in. Is that helicopter? He breathed. Coast Guard, maybe. They lunged for the signal pit they'd built above the tide line. Marcus jammed the tinder and struck sparks until his knuckles bled. Evelyn fed it palm fronds, then green leaves for smoke, thick, dark ribbons pouring upward, clawing for attention. Wind pushed it sideways. The helicopter veered, circled once, twice. Evelyn ran into the open, waving both arms, voice cracking as she screamed. The blades grew louder, a wall of sound. Sand geysered beneath the rotor wash, lashing their faces. Marcus threw his body between Evelyn and the violent wind, holding her upright as the machine crouched above them like a hovering beast. A bright orange swimmer descended on a cable water slick and impossible boots thudding against sand. United States Coast Guard, he shouted over the thunder. 2 survivors. Evelyn nodded, tears scouring clean tracks on her salt-streaked cheeks. Marcus could only nod as well, his throat locked around a prayer he didn't know how to finish. The swimmer's gloved hands were quick, professional. He checked pulses, scanned pupils, pressed a radio to his ear. Adult female, adult male dehydration, soft tissue injuries, possible malnutrition. Copy. Another cable dropped a bright stretcher. The swimmer gestured. We'll hoist one at a time. Evelyn turned to Marcus, panic flaring. Do not leave me. I won't, he said, grabbing her shoulders, forcing her to see him. I'll be right behind you. She swallowed, nodding once, like a soldier. When the harness snapped around her, she flinched, then breathed through it, jaw set hard. The cable tugged, the beach fell away. She was airborne, fingers stretching toward Marcus until the wind commanded them apart. He held her gaze anchored by the one thing the island had given them when it stripped away everything else. His turn came next. The sky yawned wide, the sea small beneath him, the island a green comma in an endless sentence of blue. He rose into a roar of metal and wind. On the deck, hands pulled him in buckles, freed blankets thrown scratchy blessed. Evelyn sat upright under her own blanket, eyes shining, face wild with relief. She reached across the gap and gripped his hand with fierce shaking joy. Inside the cabin, life returned in sharp antiseptic details. Headsets against ears. A medic's questions like stones skipping name, age, next of kin. Marcus Thompson, he shouted. 34. My daughter Lily. She's with her grandmother Grace Parker in Miami. A pen hovered. He gave the number with a care that felt like prayer. The medic turned to Evelyn. Name Evelyn Carter, she said, voice steadying by force of will. Carter, Global Shipping. My assistant Natalie Brooks has emergency protocols. She rattled off a number, then faltered, looking back at Marcus, as if afraid the saying of her other life might push this one away. They flew. Water unrolled beneath them like bruised silk. Evelyn squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. He didn't let go. When the helicopter banked toward a larger ship, a cutter bristling with antennas, Marcus felt the island slide backward inside him, not gone, just receding like a tide that would come back at night when the world was quiet and ask what he had done with its lessons. On the cutter, they were shepherded into a white compartment that smelled like bleach and wet rubber. Stretchers on hooks, metal benches. A medic pried at Marcus's cracked knuckles and hissed softly at the rawness. You two must have angels. Evelyn's laugh was a ragged thing. We had each other. He would remember that line for a long time. How she said it without irony, without a business mask, as if the words were truer than any press release she had ever approved. Paperwork multiplied like rain. Someone thrust a satellite phone toward Marcus. The connection crackled, then found its way. Grace, he said, and his voice broke on the first syllable. It's me. I'm coming home. He could hear Lily in the background, high bright, disbelieving, then a tumble of tears and laughter that throbbed in his chest like a second pulse. I love you, he said to both at once, to all of them at once. A small miracle of sound, and the medic turned away to give him a scrap of privacy in a room that had none. When Evelyn spoke to her assistant, her face moved through shock to calculation to something complicated Marcus would later call courage. I'm alive, she said. We're alive. A pause. Don't alert the press until I'm stateside. Prepare statements. Tell the board I'll brief them in 48 hours. Another pause longer, and she looked at Marcus as she said it. Also, cancel New York for 2 weeks. I'll be in Miami first. She ended the call and stared at her hands bandaged. Now human hands that had learned a new grammar on the island, how to gather, how to build, how to hold. I don't know if I can walk back into that world, she whispered. You don't have to be who you were when you left it, Marcus said. Her eyes lifted, luminous and uncertain. Promise me if we're separated, I'll find you, he said. Or you'll find me. Or both, she whispered, and almost smiled. The cutter took them to Nassau. Ambulances blinked red and blue against the white slap of hospital walls, and cameras were already sniffing at the edges of the scene, long lenses, hungry eyes. The island's hush was gone. The world had its claws back. They were rushed through sliding doors into cold air and fluorescence into triage and IV bags and plastic bracelets with scannable lives. Marcus hated the smell antiseptic and lemon. It smelled like the end of things. Lisa Machine's beeps. He had to steady himself with a hand against the wall. A nurse with kind eyes noticed. You're safe, she said, and he nodded, lying politely to his body. They were placed in curtained bays side by side. Every few minutes, the curtains swayed and revealed Evelyn's profile, sharp, softened both. He could see her talking quietly to a doctor, the old authority glinting then dimming as she remembered she didn't have to command every room. Once their curtains parted together and their eyes hooked across the space like grappling lines. That look held a whole language, don't vanish. Don't let them strip away what we found. By evening, the hospital became a city. Phones blinking, carts, squeaking pagers, chirping. A young journalist slipped past security and blurted a question about the CEO heroine, and Evelyn's face did something Marcus had never seen, tired, gentle. She shook her head. No heroes, she said. Just people who wouldn't let go. Papers in triplicate. Sign here, Mr. Thompson. Here, Ms. Carter. A social worker asked about housing, about family. My daughter and her grandmother are in Miami, Marcus said. I'll go there. He hesitated. He tilted his head toward the curtain. May come too. The social worker smiled in the way people smile when they are glad for a thing they didn't help make. I hope she does. But the world has gravity. News reached New York like fire finding dry grass. Before midnight, a company jet was inbound. A board member's voice roared through a phone on speaker in Evelyn's Bay, all legal caution and reputational triage. We need you in Manhattan tomorrow. The markets. Evelyn closed her eyes, the phone like an instrument of a life trying to repossess her body. I'm in Nassau, she said. I need medical clearance. And I need... She opened her eyes and looked at Marcus through the parting curtain. I need to stop in Miami first. You need to get in front of this, the voice insisted. Press shareholders. Then brief them, she said suddenly. Steel again, but a different kind, tempered, not brittle. Tell them I'll address the board after I see my family. There was a silence, thick with boardroom outrage. Then a clipped assent. We'll send the plane. It should have felt like victory. It felt like a clock starting up again after months of merciful quiet. Evelyn let the phone slip to her lap, staring at the faint imprint the IV tape left on her skin. Marcus pushed his curtain back and stepped into her bay. The nurse pretended not to notice. You okay? He asked. No, she said honestly. But I will be. They didn't touch at first. There was too much wire and tape and protocol in the air. Then she reached for him, and he took her hand and the hospital dissolved to the size of their joined palms. If they pull you away, he said, remember the island, remember the raft, remember the promise. She nodded, jaw working. One day at a time, one choice at a time. The next day broke them apart with professional kindness. Marcus was discharged at noon, a cab voucher in one hand and a bag of medications in the other. Grace and Lily were already on their way, but the hospital had rules, and the rules were time. He lingered in the lobby, scanning every elevator ding for her face. Evelyn appeared near 3, flanked by 2 company people with efficient smiles and rolling suitcases. Her hair had been tamed, her clothes new, her posture reassembled, but the island hadn't let go. It lived in the set of her mouth, in the way her eyes searched until they found him and softened in relief. They met in the middle of all that lobby noise. The plane's waiting, she said, almost apologetic. They won't. She shook her head. I tried. I know, he said. Go. He cupped the back of her head gently, the way you hold a truth you refuse to misplace. Find me after. Miami. I'll be there. She nodded hard like she was swallowing glass. The company people shifted politely, the world tugging at her sleeve. Evelyn leaned in and kissed him quick, not furtive, but defiant acclaim staked in a public square. One day at a time she murmured against his mouth. One day at a time he echoed. The doors opened, the entourage moved, and she was swept along. She looked back once, twice, 3 times, and then the doors closed and she was gone, leaving the faint scent of her new shampoo tangled with the island salt that still lived in his memory. Marcus stood in the middle of the lobby, the air conditioning cold on his still healing skin, and understood the next chapter would be harder than any storm they had weathered. Not because the world wanted to separate them, though it did, but because love off the island required a different kind of building. Grocery lists, bedtime stories, commutes, meetings, the ordinary gravity of days. He lifted the hospital bag, tucked the discharge papers deeper, and stepped toward the sliding doors that parted like the mouth of a choice. Miami waited. Lily waited. He would go home, and he would become the man the island had taught him to be. Behind him, a TV in the lobby flickered to a breaking news banner. A talking head said words like miracle and corporate titan. He didn't turn to watch. He pushed into sunlight, into heat, into a world too loud and too bright, and felt beneath the noise the quiet drumbeat that had kept them alive. Choose. Choose again. Choose her. He pulled his phone from the plastic bag a nurse had returned to him, slipped the new SIM card into place with clumsy fingers, and typed her number slowly, reverently, like a prayer he had learned by heart. He didn't press call. Not yet. He just saved it with a name that didn't say CEO or survivor or news story. It said what the island had uncovered. Evelyn. He looked toward the sky, and for the first time since the crash, laughed out loud in a public place, unafraid of who heard. Miami was hot and heavy with life, the kind of humidity that clung to skin and turned every breath into work. Marcus stepped out of the cab in front of Grace Parker's small duplex, the scent of hibiscus and frying plantains from a neighbor's kitchen drifting through the air. He stood still for a beat, clutching the overnight bag the hospital had given him, his heart pounding louder than the cicadas buzzing in the trees. Then the door opened, and Lily launched at him like a cannonball. Daddy. Her arms wrapped around his neck, small and fierce, her little face buried against his shoulder. Marcus staggered back, laughing through the sudden rush of tears. He lifted her off the ground and just held her, the weight of her body proof that the world hadn't ended after all. Grace appeared behind her, her silver hair pinned back, eyes shining with unshed tears. "You're home," she whispered, voice breaking. "You're finally home." Marcus swallowed hard, setting Lily down only long enough to pull his mother-in-law into a hug. "Couldn't have made it without you," he murmured, feeling her hand pat his back with a steadiness he hadn't realized he needed. That night, after Lily was tucked into bed with a story she half listened to, insisting instead on asking endless questions about the island and the lady with the pretty hair, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with Grace. The ceiling fan hummed overhead, pushing warm air in slow circles. Evelyn Grace asked gently. Marcus exhaled, running a hand over his face. "She went back to New York, straight to her board, but she promised she'll come here. She wants to try." Grace studied him, eyes sharp, even in her softness. "And you're ready to let someone in again?" Marcus's throat tightened. He looked toward Lily's closed door, then back at Grace. "I didn't think I was. Not after Lisa, but it's different. It's not replacing. It's choosing again." Grace reached across the table, squeezing his hand, then let her choose too. Days passed. Marcus slipped back into routine morning shifts at the port evenings, helping Lily with homework weekends, fixing a broken fence in the backyard. Yet everything felt slightly off-kilter, like the world had been tilted by those 3 months on the island. Cranes and shipping containers seemed smaller now. The paycheck steadier but emptier. He found himself staring at the horizon more often, hearing Evelyn's laughter and the rhythm of waves only he could hear. Then one Tuesday evening the phone rang. He answered, heart already racing. "Hello?" A pause, then her voice smaller through wires but still unmistakable. "Marcus." His knees nearly gave. He sank into the kitchen chair, pressing the phone tighter to his ear. "Evelyn." I've been thinking, she said, her words tumbling quickly like she'd rehearsed and still couldn't keep up. About the island. About what we built. About the questions we asked. Marcus's chest tightened. What kind of questions? The wrong ones, she admitted. Marriage, survival, control. Those weren't the right questions. The right ones are, can love that was born in desperation survive in the real world? Can a girl who never knew how to be loved become a woman who chooses it anyway? Can a CEO stop running an empire long enough to build a home? He closed his eyes, the weight of her words pulling him into silence. Lily padded out of her room, clutching her stuffed bear eyes wide with curiosity. She mouthed, "Is it her?" He nodded. Evelyn's breath caught on the other end. Marcus, I don't want to go back to who I was. I've tried. Board meetings, shareholder calls, endless suits and schedules. And I kept thinking, what's the point of empire if you come home to emptiness? Lily climbed onto his lap, pressing her ear close to the phone, grinning as though she could hear Evelyn's voice. Marcus wrapped an arm around her, his other hand trembling on the receiver. What are you saying, Evelyn? Her voice cracked uncharacteristically uncertain. I'm saying I want Miami. I want you. I want Lily. I want to see if what we built there can survive here. I want to ask the right question this time. Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes burning. And what's the right question? There was a pause, a breath across the distance. Then softly, do you want to build a life with me? Not an empire, not survival, a life. Lily gasped dramatically, whispering into his ear. Say yes, Daddy. Marcus laughed, the sound breaking into a sob halfway through. Evelyn, yes, I want that, more than anything. On the other end, he could hear her exhale, shaky and relieved. Then for the first time since the island, her laugh came soft, real trembling with possibility. I'll be on a plane tomorrow, she said, if you'll have me. Marcus pressed his lips to Lily's hair, eyes closing. We'll be waiting. And for the first time since rescue, the air around him felt like the island again raw alive, filled with hope. The airport was a hive of sound announcements over crackling speakers, the squeal of rolling suitcases, the shuffle of hundreds of shoes echoing across polished floors. Marcus stood just past security, his heart beating harder than it had in months. Lily clutched his hand, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement, her stuffed bear tucked under her other arm like a co-pilot. And then there she was. Evelyn Carter stepped through the terminal glass doors, not in a tailored suit, not in heels that announced power with each strike, but in jeans and a linen blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked smaller, somehow stripped of boardroom armor, but her eyes searched the crowd with a sharpness that never left her. When they found Marcus, her whole body seemed to exhale. Lily squealed, breaking from her father's hand. Evelyn, the sound stopped Evelyn in her tracks. For the briefest moment, fear flickered across her face, fear of not knowing how to respond, of never having been anyone's Evelyn in that way before. Then Lily collided with her arms wrapping around her waist. Evelyn froze, breath hitching, then slowly, hesitantly, she lowered her arms and hugged back. Not perfectly, not with practiced ease, but with a trembling sincerity that left Marcus's throat tight. When Evelyn finally looked up, Marcus was there just a step away. He wanted to say something welcome, I missed you, don't ever leave. But all that came out was, you came. Her eyes softened, glistening. I said I would. For a long moment they stood there in the noise of the airport, yet in a silence that belonged only to them. Marcus reached out his hand, brushing hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his, a quiet defiance against the tide of the world that had once owned her. The drive home was filled with Lily's chatter stories about school, about pancakes with Grandma Grace, about the fort she had built in the living room. Evelyn listened intently, nodding, smiling, even laughing, when Lily proudly announced she'd made a welcome home drawing with crayons. Marcus watched from the driver's seat, his chest swelling at the sight of the two people who mattered most in his life beginning to find each other. At the duplex, Grace greeted Evelyn with cautious warmth, her eyes sharp but kind. So you're the woman from the island, she said, her voice steady, neither judgmental nor overly welcoming. Yes, ma'am, Evelyn replied softly. shoulders straight but voice humble. I owe your son and granddaughter more than I can ever repay. Grace studied her for a long moment, then nodded. We don't keep score here. Just keep your word. Evelyn swallowed, nodding back. I intend to. That evening, they shared dinner at the small kitchen table, rice beans and fried plantains. Evelyn fumbled with the serving spoon unused to family meals where food was passed rather than plated by servers. Lily giggled at her awkwardness, which made Evelyn laugh nervously too. Marcus caught Grace watching them both, the corner of her mouth curving upward despite herself. After Lily was tucked in, Marcus and Evelyn sat on the porch. The night air smelled of cut grass and jasmine. The cicadas hummed like a choir. Marcus leaned back in his chair, glancing at her. So how was it leaving New York, coming here? Evelyn exhaled slowly. Hard. The board thinks I've lost my mind. The press is circling, waiting for me to slip. But I couldn't stay there, not after everything. Not after knowing what matters now. Marcus studied her the way her face softened when she looked at Lily's crayon drawings taped to the living room window. And what matters? Her gaze shifted to him, steady and unguarded. You, Lily. This. She gestured at the quiet street, the porch light, the hum of family inside. I used to think power was measured in billions. Now I think it's measured in moments like this. Marcus's throat tightened. He reached across the small space between them, taking her hand. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't let go. I won't lie, he said. This won't be easy. Love here means bills and grocery lists and school meetings. It's not starlight and coconuts anymore. Evelyn smiled faintly, tears welling. I don't want starlight and coconuts. I want this, even when it's messy. Especially then. For the first time since the island, Marcus let himself believe that maybe they weren't just survivors clinging to each other in desperation. Maybe they were something stronger, something that could last. Inside, Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly. Evelyn glanced toward the sound, then back at Marcus. I don't know if I can be a mother, she whispered raw. Marcus squeezed her hand. You don't have to be perfect, just present. Her eyes shimmered and she nodded slowly. The night wrapped around them filled with the hum of ordinary life. And for Marcus, that ordinary felt extraordinary. Evelyn Carter, once a woman defined by empires, was now here on his porch, holding his hand, daring to believe in something she had never trusted before. Not power, not control, but love. Morning came with the smell of coffee and cinnamon, a warm ribbon threading through the small kitchen, while the sun threw rectangles across the linoleum. Marcus flipped pancakes the way Lily liked, small and crisp at the edges, while Evelyn hovered at the counter, trying to figure out where the forks lived without asking. The island had made her brave about storms and silence. The duplex required a different courage, the kind that asked small questions and waited for ordinary answers. Drawer by your knee, Marcus said without looking up. She pulled it open and smiled a little victory that no one but her would measure. I could get used to this. Pancakes, Lily said, feet drumming against her chair. Finding things, Evelyn replied, sliding forks onto the table, careful to set Lily's beside the pink plastic cup with daisies. And pancakes. Definitely pancakes. Grace came in tying her robe tighter, surveying the scene with that calm, searching gaze that could feel like both blessing and cross-exam. Church rummage sale needs shelves, Marcus, she said, accepting the mug he offered. If your hands get itchy. They're already itching, he said. I've got reclaimed pine in the garage. Might show Lily how to sand without losing a fingertip. Lily beamed. Can Evelyn help 3 words? Simple. Dangerous. Evelyn froze with the syrup in her hand, every meeting she'd ever run vanishing before the 6 eyes at this table. If you want me to, she said carefully. Lily nodded as if appointing a cabinet member. I do. They ate with the clatter and comfort of people learning each other's rhythms. Evelyn misjudged the syrup and made a river across her plate. Lily showed her how to herd it with the edge of a fork. Marcus watched the two of them in the easy chaos, felt something unclench that had been tight since the helicopter. The island had stripped them. This table was dressing them in a different life. After breakfast, the day split along the lines of any other day and none. Marcus took the garage door up. Light poured across the concrete like a promise. He set sawhorses' planed edges, coaxed the scent of sap and heat into the room. Evelyn stood at the threshold, hands tucked into the pockets of her linen pants, as if the garage might be a country with customs she did not yet know. He handed her a sanding block. Short strokes. Let the paper do the work. You don't win by pressing harder. Story of my career, she said wryly, but her grip eased. The first pass sounded like a polite argument, the second like a conversation. By the third, she had found the grain the way to move with rather than against. See, Marcus said, pleased. Evelyn looked down at the smoothing board and then up at him, expression brighter than any quarterly report had ever made her. I made something better than it was. You did. The phone on the toolbox skittered with a call, her screen lit with a name that might as well have been a time zone chairboard. The old life knocking like a debt collector. Evelyn's throat tightened. She wiped dust from her hands too quickly. I should take it. Marcus nodded. I'll be here. She stepped onto the porch to answer shoulders collecting themselves into a straight line. Lily slipped into the doorway and pressed her cheek into Marcus's arm. Is she in trouble? She's just figuring out hard things, he said, ruffling the crown of hair that always escaped her ponytail. We all are. On the porch, Evelyn listened to a voice she could have timed by the minute hand. Risk exposure, market sentiment, optics. Her responses were measured professional words she could assemble underwater. We'll maintain guidance. No change to operational tempo. I will attend Friday's earnings call. But when the chair said, your personal situation remains a distraction, the island flared in her chest like lightning over black water. My personal situation is called a life, she said, quiet and precise. And it's the reason I'm leading better than I did before. The silence on the line was not the respectful kind. Investors won't see it that way. Then we'll teach them, she said. We've taught harder lessons. She hung up. Her hands trembled, but not from fear alone. When she came back to the garage, Marcus had a second sanding block ready. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. They sanded in companionable scrape, scrape, scrape until noon pulled them toward errands. The grocery store felt louder than the island had ever been. Fluorescent lights, endless choices, a waterfall of cereals that tasted like cartoons. Evelyn reached for the box Lily chose and startled at the silly, uncomplicated weight of it in her hand. I have a board vote on freight allocations next week, she said to no one and to Marcus both. But these shelves feel harder. Welcome to logistics, he said, grinning. Pick 2 kinds of apples and accept you'll be wrong. At the checkout, the cashier stared a beat too long. A tabloid sat by the gum with her face on it, glossed before the island headline, Brain CEO's Desert Romance Sinks Stock. Evelyn's stomach went cold and slick. She turned the magazine face down. Lily watched solemn. They don't know, do they? No, Evelyn said, leaning close. And we don't need them to. Back home, ordinary unfolded like a slow hymn. Dishes, laundry. A Lego City Lily insisted needed an airport. Evelyn attempted a runway out of a baking sheet and 2 cookbooks. Lily approved the permit with stamps from her craft kit. Grace pretended not to smile. In the late afternoon, clouds piled like folded linen over the horizon. The humid air slept heavy. In Lily's room, crayon drawings lined the wall boats with flags. 3 figures under a huge yellow sun. Evelyn stood in the doorway, hands in her pockets, trying to learn without asking to see the map of this child's heart. Do you want to read to her tonight? Marcus said gently. He'd changed shirts, the sawdust still in his hair like golden pollen. The word snagged. Boardrooms had tells. This room had none. I've never read to a child. She winced at how spare and sharp that sounded. Good, Marcus said. You won't overthink it. Lily climbed into bed, holding the bear by one ear. Evelyn can pick the book. Evelyn's fingers hovered over spines like they were classified. She chose the one with the lighthouse on the cover. When she opened it, the pages made a soft breath. Her voice on the first lines was too careful, clipped at the edges. By the second page, it loosened. By the fourth, it warmed. She discovered places where you pause and let drawing do the talking. She discovered the way a small head leans closer when a sentence leans into wonder. Marcus stood in the hall listening, that rare pleasure of hearing two people he loved make each other real. Grace passed by and squeezed his arm, saying nothing, the blessing that lets a man say nothing back. When the book ended, Lily tugged Evelyn's sleeve. Again tomorrow, Evelyn swallowed. Again tomorrow. The words surprised her by how much they weighed and how little they hurt. Later on the porch, the sky bruised toward evening. The scent of rain lifted from the sidewalks. Marcus brought 2 glasses of iced tea and sat. Evelyn watched one car go by, then another, the small parade of a neighborhood that knew bedtime and trash day better than press cycles. I got a message from PR, she said. They want photos. The narrative is getting away from them. What's the narrative, he asked. She smirked without humor. That I fell for a longshoreman on a beach and forgot how to spell fiduciary. She stared into the street. I didn't forget. I decided there were other words worth learning. Like what? She looked at him. Home. A drop of rain struck the porch rail. Another. The storm did not rage, it rehearsed. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced down and then up. Captain put me on second shift for the week. Starts tomorrow. I'll miss dinner 2 nights. Okay, she said too quickly. You can say you hate it. I don't. She lied and then laughed at herself. I do. But I hate not knowing who I am in this picture more. You're Evelyn, he said. Not the title. The person who stayed in a storm and read a lighthouse book better than I ever could. She turned her glass in a slow circle condensation, drawing a ring on the table. What if I mess this up with Lily? With you? With the company? I've never held 3 fragile things at once. You held the shelter, he said, while the sky tried to peel it away. That was different. It was the same. The rain clicked into a steadier tempo. She closed her eyes and let it find her face. When she opened them, she seemed less assembled and more alive. Tomorrow, she said. I meet with the Miami team in the morning. I told them we're realigning freight out of New York. They'll fight me. Do it anyway. She nodded. Then Lily's class has an art show at 2. I told her I'd be there. And you will? He said not as a question. I will, she answered, and then her voice thinned. If the board doesn't call an emergency session. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. If they do, put them on mute for 5 minutes and clap for her painting. You can survive 5 minutes of shareholder indignation. Lily can't survive an empty chair with your name on it. The truth slid in like a key. She looked at him a long time. She nodded once. The next day arrived like a dare. She wore flats she could run in. She put her hair in a simple knot she could undo without a mirror. She met with the Miami team and redirected 2 routes with the clean muscle of someone who had learned how to hold release hold. Pushback came printed and polite. She stayed polite and immovable. By 1:30 she was in the car traffic, a river that wouldn't admit what the clock insisted. She parked 2 blocks away and ran. She slid into the classroom at 2:07, breathless cheeks bright. No one turned. Children have their own gravity. At the back, Lily's painting waited 3 stick people on a beach with a raft shaped like a smile, a sun the size of a dinner plate. There was a small compass in the corner arrow pointing not north, but toward the tallest stick figure's hand. The caption said in wobbly letters, Our Boat. Lily saw her and didn't shout. She just did a small contained bounce that somehow made more noise than cheering. Evelyn crouched to the level of the painting and found her own eyes wet. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's us, Lily said. You came. I came, Evelyn said, and felt the sentence lock into a place inside her where board votes could not reach. That evening, Evelyn's inbox stacked itself into a digital storm. A gossip site pushed the photo from the checkout stand online. Commenters did what commenters do. The board liaison sent a 3-paragraph concern. The chair sent one cold sentence. We will revisit leadership stability on Friday. Evelyn held the screen and then put it face down. She walked to the garage where Marcus was wiping linseed oil across the finished shelf. The wood glowed like something that had remembered its tree. They're coming for you, he asked without looking up. They're coming for a version of me I don't want, she said. The new one has a better lawyer. He smiled at that. What's her name? Evelyn, she said. Just Evelyn. He set the rag aside and took her hands, palms rough against rough. One day at a time. One choice at a time, she returned. And tonight she considered the question as if it were a map. Tonight, I choose spaghetti bedtime at 8:30 and no reading email after 9. He nodded solemnly. Aggressive strategy. High upside, she said, and he laughed, and she did too, the delicate machine of the day finally humming true. When the pasta boiled over, Lily shrieked theatrically. Grace swore softly. Marcus fumbled for the dish towel, and Evelyn Carter, who once landed mergers in 3 currencies before lunch, reached out and turned the heat down like she'd been doing it her whole life. The steam rose. The bubbles gentled. The storm for once took orders. Later, after dishes and a second lighthouse. Chapter after a good night that did not wobble, they stood by the sink, 2 glasses, 1 quiet kitchen. Evelyn leaned into the counter, looking at him. Tell me something the island taught you that you didn't know how to say until today. He thought about it. That love isn't a rescue, he said at last. It's a raft you take turns holding together. She nodded, eyes filling. Then let's keep tying knots. And they did small, ordinary knots, the kind that don't show up in press releases but outlast storms. Friday dawned too bright, too sharp. The kind of Miami morning that didn't care if a boardroom 5 states north planned to dissect Evelyn Carter's future. The light spilled across the small duplex kitchen anyway, bouncing off cereal bowls and Lily's school backpack hanging from a chair. Evelyn sat at the table in a simple blouse laptop, open earbuds ready. Marcus poured her coffee, setting it by her hand. Fuel, he said quietly. She looked up, gave him a half smile. And armor. He bent, kissed the top of her head. You've got better than armor. You've got us. The words steadied her more than the coffee. She logged in. Faces filled her screen, rows of directors in tailored suits, backgrounds of New York offices and mahogany studies. They greeted her with the clipped politeness of men who smelled blood in the water. Ms. Carter, the chair began. We appreciate your time. There are concerns regarding stability optics and recent distractions. Distractions. She knew what that meant, the island Marcus, the gossip columns painting her survival as scandal. Her voice, when it came, was firm but calm. I survived a plane crash. I led myself and another through 3 months on an uninhabited island. I returned to a company that not only survived my absence, but thrived under the systems I put in place. That tells me something important, that I no longer have to micromanage to prove my value. My leadership is not diminished, it is stronger, because I now understand what actually sustains people. Not fear, not control, trust. A murmur rippled across the digital room. The chair leaned forward. Trust does not raise stock prices. Evelyn's jaw tightened. But people do. Crews, managers, families. If we lead by fear, we burn them out. If we lead by trust, we keep them. I've lived both. I know which one works. For the first time, silence followed her words. Heavy weighted. She let it sit, her pulse hammering Marcus's steady presence at her back, like a lighthouse she couldn't see but knew was there. When the meeting ended, she closed the laptop with hands that shook. Marcus was already sliding her coffee closer. She looked at him, eyes wet. I didn't lose it. I didn't cave. He grinned. Told you. Better than armor. The day unfolded with its own rhythm, ordinary and defiant. She drove Marcus to his shift at the port, the smell of diesel and salt hitting her like memory. Workers waved. Some whispered, recognizing her from magazines. She didn't flinch. She waved back. At school, Lily's art teacher handed Evelyn a note. Lily's been quieter today. Evelyn crouched at her desk, brushing hair from her daughter's face. What's wrong, Bug? The answer was soft. What if you leave like Mommy did? The question broke her. She swallowed hard, pulling Lily close. I can't promise I'll never be far for work, but I promise I'll always come back. And I'll never choose work over you, ever. Lily studied her 7-year-old eyes sharp with the wisdom of loss. Then she nodded, small arms wrapping Evelyn's neck. Okay. That night, spaghetti sauce bubbled on the stove again, laughter filling the kitchen in fits and bursts. Evelyn burned the garlic bread Grace teased her. Marcus saved it with butter and salt. Lily announced she'd drawn a new picture, 3 figures holding hands under a roof a heart above them. That's us, she said proudly. Our family. After Lily was asleep, Marcus and Evelyn sat on the porch. The night smelled of rain and jasmine streetlights flickering across wet pavement. Evelyn leaned into his shoulder, her voice low. They might fire me. Then you'll build something else, he said. Not alone this time. Her hand found his fingers lacing. I'm not afraid of storms anymore. Not with you. He kissed her hair, breathing her in. One choice at a time. One day at a time, she echoed. The cicadas hummed. A car passed. Ordinary sounds in an extraordinary moment. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Carter felt that love, messy, fragile, stubborn, was not weakness. It was the only strength that mattered. The weekend arrived with restless air clouds thickening over Miami like the prelude to a storm. Marcus worked the morning shift at the port cranes towering against the skyline, the clang of metal echoing across the bay. Every time he wiped sweat from his brow, he thought of Evelyn at the duplex, with Lily, wondered if she was holding her ground or second-guessing every breath. At home, Evelyn sat cross-legged on the living room floor, with Lily crayons spread like a rainbow battlefield around them. She tried to stay focused on the drawing, but her phone buzzed and buzzed. Messages from board members, articles speculating. One headline blared across the screen: CEO loses focus, personal entanglement threatens Carter Global. She clicked it despite herself, her stomach twisting at the grainy photo of her leaving Lily's school, Marcus at her side. Lily noticed. You're frowning again. Evelyn set the phone down quickly, forcing a smile. Just work stuff. Daddy says work stuff isn't the most important, Lily replied, coloring the ocean with thick blue strokes. Family is. The words landed like a blow. Evelyn blinked hard, her throat closing. He's right, she whispered almost to herself. That night, Marcus returned home sweat-soaked and bone-tired. Grace handed him a towel and muttered something about fixing the gutter before hurricane season. Evelyn waited on the porch phone in her lap, her eyes searching his face. They're circling, she said before he could ask. The board. The press. They're painting me as unstable, unfit. A liability. Marcus leaned against the railing, looking out at the street where children rode bikes in twilight. And what do you believe? She hesitated, fingers tightening around the phone. I believe I'm tired of being who they need me to be. She looked at him raw, unguarded. But I'm terrified of who I might be without it. He turned to her, fully placing his hands on her shoulders. Evelyn, you've built empires. You've survived storms. You've held a shelter against a hurricane. You can build a life here with us. That's not weakness. That's the hardest thing you'll ever do, and the most important. Her eyes shimmered. But if I lose the company, then you'll still have a family. You'll still have love. You'll still have you. The words cracked something in her. She sagged against him, her forehead pressing to his chest. For a long moment they stood there, the hum of cicadas and the smell of rain wrapping around them. On Sunday morning, Evelyn made a choice. She wore jeans and a simple white shirt, not designer, not tailored. At church with Grace and Lily, she sat quietly listening as the pastor spoke of storms, as tests of love as anchor. When the service ended, Lily tugged her hand, asking if she liked it. Evelyn bent down and kissed her forehead. I loved it, she said, and meant it. That afternoon, she opened her laptop again. The board had demanded an emergency call. Marcus sat at the kitchen table across from her, sanding a small block of wood Lily wanted as a keepsake. Evelyn's hands shook as she clicked into the meeting. Miss Carter. The chair began, his tone colder than steel. Your public behavior is unacceptable. If you do not return to New York immediately and distance yourself from this situation, we will move for your removal. Evelyn glanced at Marcus, who lifted his head, meeting her eyes with steady calm. One day at a time. One choice at a time. Her voice was clear when she answered. Then remove me. Shock rippled across the screen. The chair sputtered. You throw away your career. Evelyn straightened her spine, shoulders steady. No, I'm choosing my life. If you can't accept that, then perhaps it's not a company I want to lead. She clicked leave meeting. The silence afterward was deafening. Marcus exhaled, setting the block of wood down. You just detonated your empire. Her hands trembled, but her face looked freer than he had ever seen it. She reached across the table, gripping his hand. No, she whispered. I just started building something better. The storm outside finally broke, rain lashing against the windows. But inside the small duplex, Evelyn Carter felt unshaken for the first time in her life. The storm outside stretched into evening rain drumming steady against the roof, thunder rolling low like a tired giant. The duplex was lit softly by lamplight, the smell of Grace's stew filling the rooms with warmth that seemed to fight back the weather. Evelyn sat at the table with Marcus and Lily. Her laptop closed her phone face down. For the first time in decades, she wasn't waiting for it to buzz her back into someone else's demands. Lily slurped a spoonful of broth and grinned. "This is better than coconut crab." Evelyn laughed, startled by the ease of it. "Yes," she said, touching the child's cheek, "much better." After dinner, Marcus washed dishes while Evelyn and Lily dried. Grace moved quietly between them, humming an old hymn. The storm battered, but inside everything felt unshakable. When Lily finally yawned her way to bed, Evelyn kissed her forehead, a kiss that trembled with inexperience but landed like promise. On the porch, she found Marcus waiting. The rain had slowed to a whisper, streetlights painting the wet pavement gold. He leaned against the railing, arms crossed, his face half in shadow. "You did it," he said. She tilted her head. "Did what chose." Walked away from the company. From the board. From all of it. Her throat tightened. "I thought it would feel like falling." She reached for his hand. "But it feels like landing." Marcus's fingers closed around hers, rough, steady. "Because you finally landed where you were meant to." They stood in silence for a while, the world hushed by rain, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and jasmine. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice low. "Marcus, on the island, I asked if I had to marry you to survive. Tonight I'm asking something else." He turned, searching her eyes. "What's that? Will you let me love you? Not because we need each other to live, but because I don't want to live without you." The words caught in his chest. He thought of Lisa, of vows whispered in a small church, of promises kept until the very end. He thought of Lily, of bedtime prayers for family, for laughter, for someone who could carry light into their home. And he thought of Evelyn, once armored in power, now stripped bare, offering him not control but vulnerability. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I will let you, and I will love you back." Their kiss this time wasn't tentative. It was steady, deliberate, the kind of kiss that sealed not desperation, but decision. Inside, Grace peeked through the curtain, a faint smile tugging her lips. She whispered a blessing no one heard and let the curtain fall. Weeks turned to months. Evelyn settled into Miami life with an awkward grace that softened each day. She learned how to braid Lily's hair, how to make pancakes without burning them, how to sit in school auditoriums and clap like a mother who belonged. Marcus taught her how to plane wood, how to sand with the grain, how to find beauty in the slow work of hands. Grace taught her patience the art of family dinners, where conversation was the currency. News of her resignation shook the financial world. Articles speculated, shareholders debated, but Evelyn didn't care. For the first time in her life, headlines weren't her measure. One evening, they returned to the beach, the same stretch where Marcus and Evelyn had once fought storms and fear. Lily ran ahead, her laughter chasing gulls into the sky. Evelyn held Marcus's hand, the tide washing over their ankles. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked softly. She shook her head, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I regret not choosing sooner." He pulled her close, his voice low. "Then let's keep choosing, every day." "Every day," she echoed. The sun dipped, setting the ocean on fire, painting the sky in orange and violet. Evelyn pressed her cheek to his chest, listening to the heartbeat that had steadied her through storms and silence. 3 days on an island had turned them into survivors. 3 months had turned them into partners. And now, standing in the surf, they were something more family. Not because they had to, because they chose to. And that choice, repeated in the quiet courage of each new day, was enough to build forever. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.